15 years at the top ended in a 15-minute meeting, no warning, no explanation, just a revised contract that gutted my salary and erased my authority while pretending to preserve my dignity. They assumed I would sign it and stay silent. I did sign, but not because I accepted. I nodded once, said nothing, and left the folder untouched on the table, because I knew something they had forgotten. I was not just a title on the org chart, I was the architecture beneath it. They removed the visible structure, but left the foundation. I built the systems they now depend on. I watched their new order unfold with the calm of someone who understands what happens when pressure hits a hollow core. The question is not whether I will return. The question is what they will become when I do. The story begins with an abrupt fracture. A long-serving systems architect, 15 years embedded in the core of the company, is dismissed without warning. The termination is formal, clean, and cowardly. This is not personal. They say that is the lie. In a glass-walled office, under artificial light, a revised contract strips him of salary, scope, and legacy. He does not protest. He nods once, signs the paper he knows is a provocation, and walks out. The exit is unremarkable by design. No fight, no farewell-only precision. He leaves quietly, but what remains is anything but silence. The systems, the protocols, the data streams, they are his design. He is no longer in the room, but his presence still governs its operations. That is the true setup. They removed the man, not the intelligence. From that point forward, the story shifts from personal dismissal to structural dissonance. As the company reshapes itself in his absence, the first cracks appear. His access is revoked, but partial redundancies flicker. He notices subtle variances in audit logs, numbers that pass cursory reviews but break under scrutiny. A new consultant arrives, armed with slogans and mandates, tasked with purging what they call legacy systems, a euphemism for deleting memory. Meanwhile, deeper inconsistencies emerge. Documents seem legitimate. Signatures match. Yet patterns reveal a darker coherence. Vendor payments routed through shell entities. Suspicious names populating payroll ledgers, and compliance checks that flag nothing because they are built not to see. The rot is not accidental, it is engineered, and the ones who benefit are not nameless. They are spouses, nephews, friends of the inner circle. The fraud is not hidden in shadows. It is embedded in process. Midway through the narrative, everything tightens. The protagonist stops watching and starts recording. No outbursts, just precision. What he uncovers is systemic fraud, automated and concealed through legitimate channels. As his quiet investigation sharpens, the company begins to feel his shadow. The legal team issues veiled threats. HR demands silence in the name of severance compliance. He does not respond. Their fear confirms his effectiveness. The game has shifted. They know what he knows, but they cannot trace what he has already mirrored and archived. Off-site backups, redundant trails, everything prepared. The climax arrives not with chaos, but with calculation. In a scheduled board meeting, timed disclosures detonate. Forensic records, time-stamped access logs, media packets, whistleblower protocols triggered, regulators alerted before the first question finishes. No raised voice, no vengeance speech, just data, cascading across screens. The consultant freezes. The CFO, who thought distance meant protection, every decision was mirrored by the man they dismissed. Silence becomes strategy. Structure becomes justice. The fallout is not flames, but function. The board, shaken by exposure but desperate to survive, asks him to return, not to restore power, but to restore integrity. He agrees, but on his terms. Not revenge, reconstruction. The system will be rebuilt, not from scratch, but from discipline. The final image is not him standing victorious, it is him standing quiet, overlooking a newly reinforced architecture. A bridge, rebuilt, not for show, but for strength. Structure, once corrupted, is restored not through force, but through fidelity. The core of this narrative is the protagonist, the silent architect whose strength lies not in charisma or confrontation, but in precision. He is institutional memory personified, the kind of man who does not advertise his brilliance because he believes structure should speak for itself. From the outset, he is loyal, quietly competent, and consistently overlooked. He does not demand credit because he has always derived meaning from function, not recognition. But when the institution betrays him, dismissing him with cold formality and no eye contact, he does not unravel. Recalibrate. His psychological transformation unfolds, not through escalation but through compression. At first, he distances himself, becoming the watchful observer. He maps fault lines in silence, watches alliances shift, measures risk, not by emotion but by behavior. What begins as passive distance becomes strategic assessment. By the midpoint, he is not simply watching corruption unfold, he is isolating its logic. As the system's fractures reveal themselves, he moves with increasing clarity. The final phase of his arc is defined by action, not reaction. He exposes the rot not to punish, but to reclaim structural integrity. His silence is never absence, it is an act of restraint, control sharpened into a tool. Anger exists, but it is never voiced. Instead, it is converted into rigor. Repression becomes weapon. Discipline becomes vengeance. Opposite him stands the boss, an MBA careerist whose primary flaw is misreading silence as submission. He does not act out of malice, but out of arrogance. He sees tenure as baggage and legacy as inefficiency. His role is less about personal betrayal and more about catalyzing the system's unmasking. In firing the protagonist, he opens the gate to collapse, thinking he is executing a standard corporate maneuver, but he lacks insight. He does not understand what was built or who built it. His mistake is not cruelty, is blindness. And that blindness becomes the domino that topples the institution. The true antagonist, however, lies deeper. The operational villain, a CFO or equivalent, is not loud, not reckless, but meticulous. He hides theft behind policy. He launders money through vendor systems and populates payrolls with relatives under fake roles. He believes in procedural immunity, that if it looks legitimate, it must be untouchable. He uses the very systems the protagonist built to obscure the theft, unaware that the architecture contains redundancies the protagonist alone understands. He thinks longevity means safety. What he fails to grasp is that institutional wisdom never truly disappears, it only retreats, waits, and records. Then comes the consultant, the imported authority brought in to sever the past. His purpose is not to understand, but to erase. He arrives with fresh terminology and no historical knowledge, hired to clean house but ignorant of what that house is made of. He speaks in abstraction, efficiency, optimization, synergy, never knowing he is dismantling systems that still pulse with embedded memory. He is not a villain, but an amplifier. His role is to accelerate collapse by removing the very safeguards he cannot perceive. Finally, in sharp contrast to the machinery of the plot, stands the emotional anchor, a spouse or partner who exists, not within the institutional frame, but outside it. Their presence offers no strategic value, no structural insight, and no dramatic solution. That is exactly why it matters. In quiet scenes, shared dinners, unfinished conversations, questions, met with silence, they reflect the human cost of repression. They remind the protagonist that structure is not an end, only a means. They do not pull him away from the path. They remind him why it matters. Their function is clarity, not rescue. They restore balance without interfering. Together, these roles form an ecosystem of betrayal and restraint, power and illusion. Each character sharpens the protagonist's arc. By contrast, the boss mistakes stillness for weakness. The CFO hides decay behind procedure. The consultant replaces memory with jargon, and the spouse restores dimension to a man trained to disappear behind code. None of them break him. They merely reveal the depth of what he withheld. The thematic core of this narrative is built on quiet contradictions, where loyalty becomes liability, invisibility becomes advantage, and restraint becomes revolution. At its heart lies the brutal paradox of loyalty versus exploitation. The protagonist has given the institution 15 years of unbroken integrity. Not for acclaim, but for structure. Yet when the institution decides to cut costs or consolidate power, it erases him without hesitation, without ceremony. No confrontation, no explanation, just a folder on the table and a revised contract that diminishes a lifetime of contribution into a single line item. This betrayal is not loud. It is bureaucratic, cold, paper-clipped, and precisely because it is procedural, it is permanent. The system does not rage against him, it deletes him quietly. That is the wound. The story is not about emotional betrayal, but institutional erasure. Wrapped tightly within that betrayal is the illusion of power. The ones with titles believe they control the system. They speak in meetings, sign documents, order restructures. But real power does not sit in the boardroom, it lives in the code. In the frameworks, in the systems designed by people like the protagonist. He has no title, but he understands the machine. The story dismantles the notion that visibility equals control. Power, here, is not who speaks loudest. It is who understands the circuitry. That is why invisibility becomes his greatest asset. The protagonist has always worked behind walls, understated, consistent, exact. He was overlooked because he wanted to be. That invisibility, once a career, liability, becomes his shield and sword. No one tracks a ghost until it is too late. While others operate under scrutiny, he moves with precision. Because no one expects the man they erase to be the one rewriting the outcome. He never needed to be seen, he needed only to remain aware. Underneath it all lies institutional rot, not the result of negligence, but of willful blindness. The fraud is not hidden. It is baked into process, normalized through policy, and ignored by those who benefit from the illusion of stability. The institution fails not because it lacks oversight, but because it rewards comfort over confrontation. Everyone saw something, no one acted. Until he did. Finally, the emotional tone of the entire narrative is grounded in discipline over emotion. The protagonist never erupts, never lashes out, never pleads for justice. His control is not denial, it is method. He channels betrayal into structure. He does not perform his anger. He weaponizes silence. While others scramble to defend their reputations, he rebuilds the system from inside out. His revenge is not a spectacle, it is a return to integrity, surgical, unforgiving, unseen, until complete. The style of this narrative is built on disciplined minimalism. Every line carries weight, and no word survives without purpose. There is no room for redundancy, no indulgence in exposition. Information unfolds in silence, precision, and implication. What is not said is often more powerful than what is. The protagonist does not explain his thinking aloud. Instead, the plot progresses through the gradual calibration of his internal state. Every development, teach, discovery, reaction, or decision is seen through his eyes but filtered through a mind trained to observe without revealing. This interior perspective defines the narrative's psychological depth. It is not his emotions that shape the story, but the way he orders them, stores them, and repurposes them as strategy. The tone is cold, deliberate, and forensic. This is not a story that pleads for sympathy or leans on melodrama. It is surgical. Every emotional beat is earned through restraint, not catharsis. Grief is shown in routines. Rage is implied in silence. Justice, when it arrives, is clean and precise, not theatrical. The language mirrors the protagonist's psychology, clipped, exact, stripped of excess. The rhythm of the prose is anchored in repetition, as emphasis, short phrases that recur and accumulate meaning over time. Lines like "they do not know" or "I nodded once" serve not only as stylistic anchors but as psychological markers. They track shifts in awareness, in resolve, in threat. "Just watch" becomes not a suggestion, but a promise. Across the arc of the narrative, the language mirrors structure, lean, self-contained, and designed for compression under pressure. Long passages are avoided in favor of compact, loaded sequences that echo the logic of code: clean, scalable, durable. What emerges is a voice that is unemotional but not inhuman, repressed but not numb. The power of the script comes not from its volume but from its control. Style here is not decoration, it is discipline. The story does not escalate through speech, it deepens through silence. And in that silence, the truth is not told, it is revealed. The symbolic framework of this narrative is meticulously constructed to mirror its psychological and thematic depth, embedding meaning within objects, structures, and patterns of survival. Systems and structures dominate the visual and narrative field, not just as technical realities, but as metaphors for the protagonist himself. Bridges, frameworks, architectural grids, these are not passive backdrops but reflections of his internal logic. He is a builder by instinct, someone who finds meaning in cohesion and stability. Every system he touches, digital, procedural, ethical, bears the mark of his discipline. When these structures are corrupted, he does not destroy them in anger. He dismantles them with the same precision he once used to design them. Architecture becomes both origin and weapon, a silent language of control, collapse, and reconstruction. Alongside these rigid structures, the plant motif, specifically the cactus, introduces a counterpoint: quiet, uncelebrated endurance. The cactus survives with minimal input, thrives in neglect, and defends itself without spectacle. Like the protagonist, it requires no external validation to persist. Its symbolism is woven into his emotional palette: low need, long memory, sharp defense. It appears in domestic moments, perhaps in the background of his home or on his desk, unmoving, unnoticed, but impossible to kill. It stands as a quiet emblem of his philosophy: endure, withhold, and wait until timing becomes a weapon. Finally, the motif of backups and storage devices embodies his most defining trait: preparation. External drives, encrypted archives, mirrored databases, these are not just tools of plot progression but symbols of how he exists in the world. He trusts no single source. Nothing he does is improvised. Every move is logged, copied, time-stamped. In a world that discards him without warning, his backups are a form of control, his insurance against erasure. More than that, they are proof that he was always watching, always recording, always prepared. These modus operandi, bridges, cactus, storage, are not decorative, they are structural. They do not decorate his story, they encode it. The narrative is engineered with precision, following a closed system logic in which nothing is accidental and everything planted must eventually bear weight. Every key element: system, access, technical knowledge, legal insights is seeded early, often in subtle, almost invisible ways. A quiet line about off-site backups, a brief mention of redundancy protocols, a single clause in a contract that once seemed innocuous. These are not mere details, they are buried tools, waiting to be activated. The script trusts the viewer to observe closely and rewards that attention later through layered revelations. By the time the protagonist moves, nothing feels abrupt. Every action has precedent. Every twist has foundation. The narrative becomes not a series of surprises, but a methodical payoff of carefully laid groundwork. There are no coincidence victories in this structure. The protagonist does not stumble into opportunity. He does not overhear a confession or receive help from a lucky break. He prevails because he understood the system better than those who tried to erase him. His success comes from foresight, not fortune. He mapped dependencies before anyone realized there was a war to fight. Even his silence is not passive, it is an anticipatory strategy. The architecture of his response is not built in reaction but in preparation. That is the difference. While others scramble to contain fallout, he is merely executing what he already designed. At the heart of this intelligent structure is the narrative's approach to exposition as weapon. Information is never dumped. It is deployed. Every reveal serves a dual function, to advance plot and to expose motive. A line of dialogue might carry surface-level clarity and a deeper operational implication. A single document shown on screen might confirm a fraud pattern and simultaneously unravel a character's power. This narrative does not pause to explain, dares the audience to follow. And in doing so, it elevates its intelligence without ever announcing it. The protagonist does not speak his strategy aloud, he demonstrates it. The story does not rely on cleverness, it demands structure. In the end, the resolution feels not like a climax, but a conclusion long earned. The plot, like the man who drives it, is quiet, complete, and utterly prepared. The emotional and procedural depth of this narrative is anchored in psychological realism. Nothing in this story is abstracted, exaggerated, or idealized. The protagonist's emotional world is defined not by cinematic outbursts but by compression, by the disciplined management of feeling beneath a calm surface. His silence is not emotional absence, it is containment. The betrayal he suffers does not make him unhinged or melodramatic. It makes him sharper, more focused, more precise. He does not seek revenge through spectacle. He adapts, absorbs, and every beat of his response feels earned because it emerges not from fantasy, but from a believable psychology, one shaped by decades of institutional observation and quiet restraint. His victory does not feel like a scriptwriter's feels like the logical conclusion of years spent understanding what others missed. Just as importantly, the corruption he uncovers is grounded in credible mechanisms, not convenient villainy. The story never leans on implausible embezzlement schemes or overblown corporate conspiracy. Instead, it depicts the kind of fraud that thrives in real-world blind spots: vendor laundering through affiliated shell companies, inflated compliance metrics signed off by lazy or complicit officers, consultancy whitewashing that replaces internal knowledge with vague audits and jargon-driven restructuring. These tactics do not require malevolence, only comfort, neglect, and plausible deniability. The rot is systemic because the incentives reward blindness. The protagonist does not catch the fraud. He documents it, traces it, and exposes it, using the same tools that once protected the company. This realism extends to the technical architecture of the story. Admin privileges, access logs, off-site backup hierarchies, permission inheritance chains, none of these are treated as plot tricks or hacker shorthand. They are presented as familiar terrain for someone who lived inside the infrastructure. The systems feel lived in, not researched. There is no flashy jargon for its own sake. Everything that functions within the technological environment reflects how these systems would realistically operate, layered, redundant, often misused by those who do not understand them. This narrative earns its intelligence not by showing off, but by staying true to the world it inhabits. It builds trust not by telling us it is smart, but by behaving in ways that only genuine experience and restraint can create. This narrative operates with surgical precision. Every moment matters, and every word functions. Nothing is decorative. Dialogue is sparse but loaded. Scenes are economical but dense with implication. Each choice in pacing, structure, and framing is intentional, creating a story that rewards attention and punishes distraction. The writing reflects its subject, a system designed for efficiency and resilience, where there is no slack and no waste. The script holds itself to the same standards as its protagonist: thoroughness over spectacle, clarity over noise. The result is a controlled narrative environment where tension does not flare, it compresses, and in that compression, stakes intensify. The story's psychological depth lies in its restraint. Silence, in this world, is not a gap, it is a deliberate act of power. The protagonist's emotional withholding is not emptiness, but structure. His silence does not ask to be filled, demands to be read. His emotional arc is internal and hard-earned, visible not in breakdowns but in recalibrations. The drama here is not in what he says, but in what he chooses not to say and what he quietly builds in the background while others assume he is gone. Silence is not absence. It is design. At its core, the story delivers thematic weight through procedure. Betrayal does not scream, it is emailed, signed, audited, and logged. The narrative insists that the most dangerous forms of erosion are the ones masked by policy and protocol. Institutional betrayal, here, is not a rupture but an erasure, and the story treats this with the quiet devastation it deserves. There is no melodrama, only slow, irrevocable displacement. That is what gives the theme its authority. Finally, This is a story built for the screen, not as a thriller, but as a pressure chamber. It should feel like a closed system under stress, cool on the surface, volatile beneath. Aesthetic parallels to the lives of others and Michael Clayton are not just tonal, they are architectural. The story carries their quiet intelligence, their attention to institutional detail, and their faith in the audience's ability to listen closely. In the circuitry of corporate systems, this is not a revenge story. It is a blueprint for structural reckoning.